area, the TUV leader, Jim Allister. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Whenever you listen to that, chaos on the streets of Ballymena, you see the damage that's been caused. I'm sure you've seen the videos on social media. What do you make of it all?
Well, it's very distressing that wanton violence should have erupted on our streets. It was unwarranted. It was unwanted. And the only thing it does, apart from the destruction, which is appalling in itself, is that it detracts from the proper narrative of the events of the night, because, you know, the assault, serious sexual assault of the weekend, which followed a previous one the previous weekend, gave rise naturally as the culmination of feeling to cause many hundreds, even thousands of people to gather peacefully and legitimately to express their concern, and to then see that hijacked and descend into violence is very distressing, both in the violence itself and in the fact that it undermines the legitimate account of what people were there to protest about.
Well, they were protesting about allegations, but I suppose the point is, whenever you see, Jim, those pictures, there were huge numbers of people who seem to have gone from that protest and then have been involved in that trouble. And that is, I suppose, one of the concerns about this.
I don't think there were huge numbers involved in the destruction. I think there were huge numbers spectating, which may be foolish in itself, but you cannot take away from the fact that what brought the people onto the streets was the serious sexual assault. And of course, it would be foolish to ignore the fact that there is a racial connotation to this matter, in that it's public knowledge and in the public media that the nature of the racial background of those who are charged. And that comes in a context, that does come in a context in which there has been significant demographic change in that part of Ballymena by virtue of unfettered and uncontrolled migration.
The point we're making here, Jim Allister, is about the trouble that occurred last night.
Which was absolutely wrong.
And you know, in some ways, the conversation that we're having is specifically not talking about that violence that we've seen. There are allegations of a sexual assault, which, of course, are being treated by the courts at the moment. But what you saw last night were crowds who were attacking houses, who were throwing masonry at police, who were starting fires in the street. Is that not where the condemnation needs to be this morning?
And that's where my condemnation has been. And, you know, we've also had the sad situation where it is at risk of spreading with a lovely Filipino family in Kalibaki had their house attacked. Now, Filipinos have nothing to do with the Roma community who are at the heart of this.
Hang on a second. You're aware that there is a court case, and we have to be slightly careful about what is being said here. There are allegations about this. And whenever we talk about, you know, people... You know, when even you talk about the idea of things potentially spreading, that is dangerous talk, isn't it? Particularly from somebody who is in a position like you, an MP.
Look, I'm not responsible for any of this. I'm here to condemn what has been happening, but I'm expressing the fear of it spreading. And I was illustrating that, you know, people will be picked upon because they are foreigners, and that is totally wrong. And we've already had that in one case in respect of Filipinos who come to this country to work. Many of them work in right bus to contribute to society, and to see a family such as that picked upon is totally revolting and wrong. But the point I'm making is this, that violence, wherever it comes from, is wrong. But the context of this situation needs to be addressed, and the context is that there has been unhindered migration, particularly from the Republic, of people of Roma extraction into Ballymena, and that has been building tensions for years.
I'm sorry. There was a protest. There was a protest last night about concerns about allegations of a sexual assault. That is nothing to do with the number of people who come from another country or whose origins are from another country who live within a town. Sorry,
I might know Ballymena, so I do better than you. And I can tell you there have been rising
but it is nothing
because of the scale of migration.
But that is nothing
Ballymena.
To do with a protest that is supposedly about allegations of a sexual assault.
Except that those now charged are of that particular designation.
I'm sorry, but as I say,
you know that's been in the public media, that the two young people charged are remaining. It was said in court. So that, I'm not in the business of trying to cover up facts. I'm in the business of facing to the facts.
The point I'm making is that what you're doing is you're taking
violence and a particular context.
But you're talking about wider tensions surrounding that in a much wider context, as you're aware.
Which do exist.
And when it ends up in violence like this, it shows that there is a great deal of need to make sure that communities are working together and that communities are together. And surely that is your responsibility as an MP to try to ensure that happens, rather than talking about dangers.
Well, sorry, it's my responsibility to face the facts of a situation. And that's what I think to do. And none of that detracts from my condemnation of the violence which occurred, the heinous, wanton violence on the streets of Ballymena, the last thing I want to see. But I'm not going to be a party to pretending that there's no explanation behind all of this. The explanation is
an explanation for violence. That sounds dangerously. That sounds dangerously close to trying to excuse violence.
Does not excuse. Does not justify. But the realities of what's happening in Ballymena need to be faced, and they've been simmering for years, and they've been brought to head by this sexual assault, which brought people legitimately, properly, peacefully onto the streets to indicate their empathy with the family. And let me say, I spoke with this family yesterday, and the last thing they want is violence. The last thing I want is violence, because they recognise, as I do, that it takes away from what should be the proper narrative, that there's a family here with a young 14-year-old girl who was assaulted in a manner which is quite appalling. Now, all of that.
Well, these are allegations, as we say. We keep on making the point that these are allegations.
There are people charged with it. Of course, they are in the courts, and that's where these matters need to be resolved, in the courts. And people with evidence need to come forward, and should need to do their job.
And should people also be coming forward with information about those individuals who were responsible last night for throwing missiles at the police, with damaging properties, with causing chaos on the streets of Ballymena?
Yes, and you shouldn't have to ask me that question. Of course they should.
And what would you say to those people who were involved in that trouble last night? Because
I would say, stop it. You're serving no cause whatsoever. You're detracting and distracting from where there is a cause, in terms of the protest about the attacks on young girls in the town. And you need to stop the violence, both because it's wrong in itself and because of the consequences of it.
OK. Jim Allister, TV leader and MP for North Antrim, thank you very much indeed.